5 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks? Find out which running back you should be adding to your fantasy football rosters. Welcome to another episode of Fantasy Dilemma. I'm your host, Nate Hamilton. You can follow me on Twitter at DominateFF. It's time to talk about who to add and drop from the wide receiver, running back, and tight end positions. The first player you're going to want to add is wide receiver Marquez ValdesScanning of the Green Bay Packers. Look, Aaron Rodgers has been looking for someone else other than Davante Adams to target, and he may have just found that with Marquez ValdesScanning. The last 2 weeks, MVS has 10 targets, 6 receptions, 202 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's turning Aaron Rodgers' passes into points, and you're going to want those fantasy points on your teams. Get him now. Next up at the running back position, it's someone I mentioned in my Week 10 waiver wire article, Wayne Gallman Jr. from the New York Giants. He now has scored a touchdown in each of his last 4 games. Even in a matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, one of the best rush defenses in the league, Gallman found the end zone twice, giving him 5 touchdowns now in those last 4 games. His yardage hasn't really been there, but he has been very consistent as far as carries go, seeing an increase every week since week 5. There are few New York Giants players that I want on my fantasy teams, but Wayne Gallman is one of them. Go out and get him now. You're likely hurting at the tight end position, so you might want to try Jimmy Graham from the Chicago Bears. It's very hard to find any consistent tight end in this league, and that's no different when it comes to Jimmy Graham. However, he is top 5 in targets at the tight end position, and he is the tight end 7 on the year. Regardless of what happens in his matchup against the Vikings on Monday Night Football, I think he's one of the few tight ends left you can get on your waiver wire who has some potential upside for the rest of the season. Let's move on and discuss who you should be dropping from your fantasy football rosters. First up, it's wide receiver Jarvis Landry from the Cleveland Browns. He is rostered currently in 82% of fantasy leagues, which is just way too much if you consider the fact that he has not scored a touchdown all season, and he's only topped 60 receiving yards twice this year. You would think he would be more productive with Odell Beckham Jr. now sidelined for the season, but this Browns offense just has not gotten it going. I don't recommend leaning on Jarvis Landry for production as we head into the fantasy playoffs. The next player to drop is at the running back position. He is rostered in 96% of leagues. It's Melvin Gordon with the Denver Broncos. The Broncos haven't had much of a run game in the last 4 weeks, and Melvin Gordon's best game since week 4 came in week 7 when he had just 68 rushing yards and a touchdown, and he fumbled twice in that game. Since then, he hasn't scored a touchdown, and he hasn't even come close to that 68 rushing yards. So he just has not shown that he is his old self as he was as a Charger in this Denver Broncos offense. I'd be looking to find a different running back to add to your rosters rather than have Melvin Gordon sitting there. Lastly, at the tight end position, it's time to drop Robert Tonyan from the Green Bay Packers. Since scoring 5 touchdowns in weeks 2, 3, and 4, he's been very quiet. In fact, he only has 1 game with more than 33 receiving yards, and he's averaged 34.8 receiving yards in the last 5 weeks. I think it's time to drop the early hot ad and move on at the tight end position. That's going to do it for this episode of Fantasy Dilemma at the Game Day. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you're watching this video. Give us a comment, let us know who you plan on adding and dropping from your fantasy football rosters as we head into Week 11, and we'll see you next week.